22nd, 21st, okay. So, so we start here in a couple weeks, and we're working on a piece of legislation that is likely the most transformational piece of legislation ever to pass in the New Mexico State Legislature related to wildlife since the formation of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, which is our state wildlife agency. One thing that this legislation seeks to do is actually change the name of the agency to become the New Mexico Department of Wildlife Conservation, because it's our state wildlife agency, and I'm an avid hunter. Those of you that know me know I can't go 2 sentences without talking about hunting or fishing in some regard. It's extremely important to me. But I want to make it clear that if we want to do huge things in the conservation space, if we want to tackle giant challenges, if we want to approach the extinction crisis with solutions that will actually work, you can't do it in a vacuum. You can't do it just with hunters, or just with anglers, or just with hikers, or just with mountain bikers, or rock climbers, or bird watchers. It takes everybody. It takes everybody. And those of you that were present last night at our happy hour, again, thanks to Trust for Public Land and Western Conservation Foundation for putting that together, you heard remarks from Chairman Nathan Small, Chairman of House Appropriations here in New Mexico, and he repeatedly said something that was told to me by Kent Salazar before he passed, and that is, you have to work with everybody and never give up. And that's the tone of today's panel. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. These people here are my partners. I mean, we work together. We're close friends. We get along great. We don't agree on everything. We often disagree on big things, important things. But we're professionals. We respect one another. And we work together on the things that we agree upon. And we agree that wildlife conservation is critical. We agree that future generations deserve our focus as stewards of the resource, so they'll be here for future generations. We might disagree on what we use wildlife for. I might like to shoot it with a bullet or an arrow, and someone else wants to shoot it with a camera. We can disagree about those specifics, but still work together on the conservation priorities that we share. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I encourage everybody to keep an open mind as we have this discussion. I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their organization, and one of the accomplishments that their organization has made within the past 5 years that they're most proud of. So I'm going to start with, on the end, my very close friend, Jessica Johnson from Animal Protection, New Mexico. Jessica, floor is yours.
All right. Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jesse. So I'm Jessica Johnson Shelton. I work for an organization here in the state called Animal Protection, New Mexico. And we also have a lobbying arm called Animal Protection Voters. I'm the senior program and policy specialist. And you know, it's hard to pick my favorite accomplishment, but I think what I'll probably highlight what we passed in 2023. And let me tell you, this was not my favorite issue to work on, but it was my favorite victory, and it was us introducing and working to introduce and pass legislation to make it a crime to sexually abuse animals. And I realize it's very early in the morning for a topic like that, so I apologize, but it was just such a unique experience working on that issue because I mean, of course, through the process of educating myself and others on the issue, I had to read and look at some really horrendous things. But the answer that we were proposing to make it a crime, and we were the second to last state in the country to make it a crime, it was so common sense that there was no debate about it. And it is the only bill that I've worked on that has passed unanimously in the first year it was introduced. and so it's my favorite, and I wish we had that experience working on wildlife reform. I think, you know, what we're working on deserves that kind of treatment as well. Yeah, that's the one for me.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And next, I'd like to go to Kevin Bixby. Kevin, go ahead and introduce yourself. Talk about your organization and what you're proud of, accomplishment you're proud of within the last 5 years.
All right, I stand up.
Sure.
So they can see.
Absolutely.
so you folks over in the cheap seats can see this time. Kevin Bixby, I'm the founder and senior advisor at a nonprofit called Wildlife for All. I live about 300 miles south of here in Las Cruces, New Mexico, in the desert. I can see Mexico from my house. I've been in New Mexico for over 30 years. I started an organization called the Southwest Environmental Center, ran that for many years, and got to know all these folks. Jesse. The thing I'm most proud of, I'd say, is we pivoted, we changed the focus of the Southwest Environmental Center from working on regional wildlife and public lands issues to working exclusively on our current mission, which is and we changed the name, to reform state wildlife management in every state, be more democratic, more just, more compassionate, and focused on protecting all species as part of ecosystems. It was, it's nothing too ambitious, but that came about because we began to see that all the issues that we were working on in New Mexico and other states really were symptomatic of this system of state wildlife management that is essentially the same in every state, as you all know. And so in 2018, we held a national conference in Albuquerque, Wildlife for All, to talk about this. I have to say, I agree that, because now my focus is on, the national focus, and I'm paying attention to what's happening in many different states. And I agree with Jesse that we have something unique in New Mexico. I'm happy to hear about how things are working in other states from all of you. But we have this amazing coalition, and that includes a whole range of different groups, animal protection to hunting groups. And I give a lot of credit to the leadership of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. Yes, it's Jesse in the last 5 years, and John Crenshaw has been a huge part of that as the leader of the board. And before that, Garrett Beneklassen and Jeremy Mespach. And we just have such a great group of wildlife leaders that at the Federation and other groups. And so we have this really special opportunity to get this bill passed, which will reform state wildlife management in the state of New Mexico, and hopefully be a model that other states can follow. Thank you.
So we're going to continue with the introductions, but first I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the actual bill so you know what we're talking about here. The bill has three primary components. One of them is to completely reform the structure of our state game commission. One of the biggest challenges with the New Mexico State Game Commission is that currently commissioners can be removed at will without cause. The governor can remove a commissioner at any time for any reason, doesn't even have to provide an explanation. And this is really problematic because the purpose of the State Game Commission is to provide insulation from politics and wildlife management, to insulate wildlife management decisions from political influence. But as long as the governor has the authority to remove a commissioner without cause, it doesn't really work. The R value of that insulation is real close to zero. Those of you that know what R values are. I'm a contractor, right? Sorry about that. So this bill will create a process for removal. So if a commissioner is going to be removed, there has to be a reason, and it can't be my campaign contributors didn't like what they did. That can be a good reason. So that's one thing the bill does. The second thing it does is it expands the authority of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. We call it the Department of Game and Fish, but it's our state wildlife agency. It manages every single species of wildlife in the state. Monarch butterflies, that's not game or fish. And so it's important that we expand the authority of the agency, and this bill will do that. The third thing it's going to do is increase hunting and fishing license fees. In the state of New Mexico, the last time, so it's in statute what our license fees are. The last time our fees were adjusted, passed the legislature in 2005, went into effect in 2006. You know, imagine what the cost of a pickup truck for a game warden was in 2006 compared to 2025. Our agency is drowning financially. They're broke. It's broken, and we need to come up with more diverse funding models besides just hunting and fishing license dollars, and we're going to do that. Representative Small, who you all met last night, is helping with that. But right now, we need an immediate fix, and that comes from hunting and fishing license dollars. And the beautiful thing about it, and I'm so proud of this as a passionate hunter, is that our membership, the members of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, we're about 70,000 members, are excited about the fee increase. We're pushing for it, we're begging for it, we're asking for it. We want to pay more because we recognize the importance of those conservation dollars. And that's, in this day and age, it's rare to find somebody who wants to pay more for something, right? That's a unique thing, and so I'm very proud of that. So those are the three primary functions of the bill. Moving on with introductions now, I'm going to go to Judy Kalman from Audubon Southwest. Judy, go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your organization, if you would.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm not much taller standing than sitting, so I'm gonna just stay here. I'll be loud. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Judy Kalman. I'm the New Mexico Policy Director for Audubon Southwest. Most of you probably know that Audubon is a bird organization, and we do work on everything that birds need, and so that includes water and climate issues and just wildlife management issues. And so I've been there for about 5 years. For the 10 years before that, I was the staff attorney at the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance, which did federal land protection. So I kind of have both a public lands policy and now wildlife background. Did you ask for the thing we're most proud of?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go in a different direction than Jess's very interesting one. I understand though, Jess, because Jess runs hard bills, and so to get something passed right away is really an amazing thing. I think my favorite accomplishment was also in 2023, which was when we passed the Land of Enchantment Legacy Fund here. This was a thing we passed that took a long time. Many iterations of the bill failed before we got something passed. And it basically is a trust fund set up to fund existing programs that work on all kinds of things conservation related at the state. So it goes to 6 different agencies and 11 programs within those 6 agencies. It's basically an endowment that was created, and the interest from it funds those programs indefinitely. And we were able to last year get it fully funded at $350 million, which ensures that it has an output at the moment of about $15 million a year in perpetuity. That's not a ton of money when you're talking about 11 programs, but we're hoping to increase it over time, and it's still really amazing because New Mexico had no dedicated source of conservation revenue for programs until we passed that. But the reason it's my favorite is because it was similar to this bill that we're going to talk about today, in the sense that the only way we were able to make it happen was with a giant coalition. I think by the time it passed, we had 39 organizations involved, which is an enormous amount, and it ranged from very small local organizations up to national organizations. And the years that we tried to do that bill and it failed, I would say was because we were not working together as well, and we learned that lesson over time, and we were able to get it passed by forming a stronger coalition. So that is why it's my favorite one. I'll pass this along.
Thank you, Judy. So the coalition Judy's referring to is that big round of applause. Judy and I are going to be actually the expert witnesses on this Wildlife Heritage Act, this 3-part bill I just talked about. It's called the Wildlife Heritage Act. Judy and I will be working together with our primary bill sponsor, Representative Matthew McQueen, and providing testimony to committees and legislators and all of the stuff. So I'm so honored to be working with Judy on this really, really important priority. But the coalition she's talking about is what's called the New Mexico Conservation Coalition. And this is the kind of coalition that I hope everybody in this room who represents a affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation will try to work to build in your state, because it's extremely broad, super diverse, and very, very effective. When Jessica Johnson and I go to meet with a legislator together, and she's with animal protection voters, and I'm from the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, the impact that has on a lawmaker is extremely powerful. It's super, super valuable. And we're gonna get more into that in a minute. Before I do that though, we'll finish our introductions with my very close friend, New Mexico Wildlife Federation staff member, previous board president of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, Luna County Commissioner, I could go on and on and on about his credentials, but Mr. Ray Trejo.
Yes. Thank you, Jason. Well, as Jesse said, I work for the New Mexico Wildlife Federation in southern part of the state. And, you know, everybody's talking about bills, and mine's a little less, maybe a little more user-friendly. One of the things I want to talk about is a win for me personally and mostly kids, because that's where my background in education lies. If you know where Deming is, it's in the middle of the desert. And as a kid growing up there, we had lots of opportunities to ride bicycles and that sort of thing, but I was fortunate enough to have family take me out fishing in the Gila. Not everybody got to do that. And, I mean, we're one of the poorest communities or counties in the state. So there wasn't a whole lot going on other than Friday night football, baseball, stuff like that. And when I became a commissioner and working in conservation, I started having these conversations with the powers that be, the elected officials. We had an old gravel pit in the middle of town. As kids, we used to ride our bicycles. You know, it was just a gravel pit. People would dump trash and started talking about creating a lake in the middle of the desert. You can imagine what the reaction was. It was like, what? You're gonna waste water? I mean, no, we need that for the golf course. Like, no, we don't. We need to give opportunity for kids. Because I've always said, if kids don't have that opportunity, they'll rarely go back. I mean, you've got to give them that opportunity, at least once. So, you know, this stirred around for many years, and finally had some folks on the city council and the county commission that thought it might actually be a great idea. So to make a long story short, we have a lake. It's called Trees Lake. There's maybe one tree. I don't know where that came from, but we hold events there. We just hosted one, I don't know, a few months ago, and had we work with the Game and Fish Department. They bring us fish and they stock it year round, and we had, I don't know, a couple hundred kids show up. We give over 100 fishing rods a year away to kids. They get a lot of swag as well. And one of the things that I remember is after the event, it was about a week later, I see two kids. Obviously, they should have been in school. They were riding their bicycles. They had the backpacks we had provided to them and the shirts. And they had two fishing rods stuck in their backpacks. They were each riding their bicycles to the lake. And I didn't call the principal. That's my story.
The annual event we do at Trees Lake, we did it October 26th this year, it's one of the most powerful public outreach events I participate in every single year. And Ray's leadership, Ray retired as principal at Deming High School, so Ray's background in education and his ability to connect with youth is extremely inspiring, and so proud of that story, so thank you, Ray. I'm gonna move into a couple of questions. First for Jessica Johnson. You know, the name Animal Protection Voters would likely cause immediate concern for a person like me who is very, very passionate about hunting and about angling. And we've been working on the language of this bill for many years now. And there have been a lot of hard conversations. I can remember 2 or 3 years ago on the phone call with Kevin Bixby for hours discussing the usage of the term food supply as part of the mission of the Department of Game and Fish to conserve wildlife for use in food supply. And there was a lot of debate around that because not everybody agrees that wildlife should be a food supply. In fact, not to get too personal, Jessica, I apologize if I am, but you're a vegan, you choose not to eat meat. We've had a lot of conversations about that, and I'm curious if you have concern with the verbiage of the bill, particularly the inclusion of the language that provides for food supply.
Yes, Jesse, you've outed me, saying the B word. yes, it's true, I haven't had meat in 15 years. But you know, I did grow up in a family where I grew up fishing. I did a lot of my growing up in northern Minnesota. I'm not originally from New Mexico. And so I lived in fishing country and deer hunting country. And I never went hunting, but I have family members that did, and grew up in a house with 3 big bucks on the wall. And so, you know, I grew up with that culture and those family hobbies. And I know, Jesse, you and I have talked about you know, the conversations that we've had about how I said, you know, I'd rather people hunt their meat rather than, you know, procure their meat from factory farms. And, you know, and that is true, factory farms are particularly egregious, but also because I grew up in a hunting family, I know the odds of actually getting what you're going after. So if everyone had to hunt for their own meat, a lot fewer animals would die, so it's very utilitarian. But you know, at the end of the day, I mean, I think, you know, the partnership between our organizations on this bill is exactly speaks to the strength of what a coalition like this can achieve. And it really is about kind of taking in everyone's perspectives and focusing in on the bigger picture. Because while, you know, certainly my organization, myself personally, might not, you know, agree with the value of using animals as food, if we don't have a modernized and successful wildlife department in our state, then it doesn't matter what any of our intentions are with wildlife. We might not have wildlife in the future if we don't do a better job. And so for our organization, we're very familiar with, you know, kind of putting aside some of the details in order to work on the common, bigger, most important value. And I think for all of us, it's that, you know, we need an agency in our state that is taking care of our wildlife for all of the reasons that each of us might have for that. And so I'm really proud of our partnership. And you know, I don't think there's any level of discomfort when we've got the final package, when we've got the bill drafted up and introduced in the next legislative session. We will be unabashedly, unequivocally in support of that bill and working hard to pass it.
Wow, thank you very much. That was powerful. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the honesty and the transparency. Recognize that when I invited these panelists, knowing some of them are not, their organizations at least are not overly supportive of hunting, they're going to be sitting in front of a group of largely hunters and anglers. And so I can't thank you enough for being willing to be vulnerable and coming and sharing your stories and your positions and your opinions and your lived and learned experiences in life. It's really fantastic, and I'm also very, very proud of our partnership, so thank you so much. Jessica talked a little bit about modernizing the agency. I'm going to turn to Judy now. Audubon Southwest, as Judy said, is kind of a bird organization. It's you think of bird watchers and ornithological folks when you're thinking about Audubon. But John Hayes, who's the executive director of Audubon Southwest, is a good friend of mine and actually a bird hunter, which is really cool. Not every Audubon chapter across the country shares that activity or the passion for that activity the way John Hayes does, but John is fantastic. Judy's not a hunter, I know that. Judy and I have known each other for a long time. But Judy, I'm curious if you'll talk just a little bit about why you and why Audubon Southwest thinks it's important to reform our state wildlife agency.
Sure, thanks, Jesse. And no, I'm not a hunter. I'm also not a vegan. I'm somewhere in between those two things. So yeah, Audubon, you know, a lot of members of Audubon are also sportsmen, including John Hayes, who's not here, but I'm gonna quote him a lot during my talk. But you know, Audubon is focused on all birds, and we know that most species of conservation need are not species which are hunted and fished. That's just what the science is. There's more species in general that are not hunted and fished than species that are. And most of the species that are in serious decline are not game species. And so we also know that activities like birding and wildlife watching are huge. Just a small New Mexico statistic for you is that the Festival of the Cranes in Socorro is the largest economic event in Socorro County. Their entire county's economy is pretty dependent on Bosque del Apache Wildlife Refuge. That festival alone sees 160,000 visitors a year, which if you know Socorro, that's a pretty amazing feat because it's not in a metro area. So we know that that is a huge economic driver, and it's not hunting and fishing related, but it is bird and bird management related. And we also know that the department is way understaffed when it comes to non-game species. And so I'll give you John Hayes, it's like he's a ghost in this room, but this is his favorite statistic about the department these days is that the department currently has 4 bird biologists. One is solely dedicated to the lesser prairie chicken, because that's a federally listed species that has a lot of conflicts with oil and gas. One is for migratory game birds, which is about 25 to 30 species under that person's purview. There's another one for upland game birds, which is about 6 to 8 species, somewhere in that range. And there's one more bird biologist who manages 203 bird species. And so that is pretty imbalanced. My new favorite John Hayes quote that I'm gonna put on a bumper sticker is, "Personnel is policy." And when you look at the department's personnel, you can see the policy decisions that they're making. And they're historically very focused on game and fish species because that's where historically their funding has come from, and it's also what their mission and mandate says they should focus on. And so when we look at climate change and declining species and preparing the department for the future, we just really think that that should be more balanced. Still focusing on game and fish species, but also an equal focus on those non-game species that are in decline. And so this bill seeks to just clarify that the department should do that, and also seeks to get additional funding, both from license fee increases, but also from other sources, to make sure that they have the resources to do that.
Thank you, Judy. Next I want to go to Ray Trejo. Ray, lifelong hunter, hunting is woven into the fabric of your life in every way, I think. I can tell that by the time you don't spend at work.
Call it sabbatical.
Ray generally takes off from November 15th to February 15th because that's quail season in New Mexico, and Ray's a legendary quail hunter. He's got unbelievable bird dogs. He's got all kind of videos and stuff on Project Upland, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, all this stuff. Ray's a celebrity in that regard. But Ray, I'm curious, you've been engaged with the State Game Commission as long as anybody in this room for sure. You pay very close attention to the issues. You've been a super engaged advocate for most of your life. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about why you think it's important that we reform the structure of the State Game Commission. And I'd also like you to comment whether or not you're concerned about the change of the name of the agency. Does it cause you concern that we're gonna go from the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, which sounds very like hunting focused, this is our Game and Fish Agency, to the New Mexico Department of Wildlife Conservation? Does that cause you concern? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Jesse. And my involvement in wildlife conservation, Game Commission, I have to blame that on Jeremy Besbach. Thank you, Jeremy, who recruited me a long time ago. I was just a young pup, and yeah, I don't know how I did that, but here I am. I want to start off by saying, working together, Kent Salazar, good friend of mine, he gave me a pocket knife, and it's in my pocket. I carry it every day. But, working together is essentially what we're doing now. We've been to the roundhouse many times, not working together. And what has that gotten us? Not a whole lot over the years. So I continue to become educated by working together, as Kent said. So I appreciate Kent and what he said. Changing the name of the commission doesn't haunt me at all. I think, again, I've become more educated, because when we talk about wildlife, there's a whole lot of species out there, and I know that hunting, to me, is not as sexy as it used to be for a lot of people. You know, hook and bullet organizations are just not that sexy anymore. And being able to work together for the good of the wildlife is important, and it brings people together, different views. So, yeah, Jesse, I don't think it's gonna harm in any way. But I do wanna say one other thing, and I say this often: when you really wanna look at an organization or a game commission, if you will, or a wildlife agency, look at their boards or their commissions, and that'll tell you the story. And I truly believe that. And when we look at our game commission today, it tells a story. Just look at it. And what has happened over the last several years. So, yeah, thanks, Jess.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. Next, we're gonna go to Kevin Bixby. So Kevin Bixby, as he already introduced himself and described his affiliation with Wildlife for All, I'll say, and Kevin and I were talking about this last night quite a bit. Some of you are familiar with Randy Newberg. Randy Newberg did a podcast recently with Andrew McKean, and Kevin Bixby was the primary topic of conversation in that podcast. Kevin Bixby's effectively earned himself a reputation as like the nation's leading anti-hunter. The nation's leading anti-hunting organization, all these things. And I'm not saying that that perception is accurate, but that's the perception that exists, and that's the rhetoric that I'm hearing on a lot of the national hunting media outlets. When I'm listening to Meat Eater, Randy Newberg, when I'm listening to all of these different podcasts, reading articles in Field and Stream Outdoor Life, you hear Wildlife for All, it's almost become like the new PETA. When I was growing up, it was PETA was the thing, or the Humane Society of the United States. Now it's kind of become Wildlife for All. So Kevin is working around the country to reform wildlife management, to reform the way that states engage in wildlife. And I guess the question that I have for Kevin, as I mentioned earlier, we debated a lot on the language of this bill, specific words. We would spend hours on single words. And one of the words that we debated on was the word intrinsic. He said it was really important to Kevin that this bill said that wildlife has intrinsic value. And we had a lot of conversations about that, and I'd just like to provide Kevin with the opportunity to speak for himself instead of allowing the national perception to paint a picture of him without his approval, perhaps, to say how he actually feels about hunting, and also talk about why that word intrinsic value was so important to him for inclusion in this bill language. So Kevin, if you want to have the floor, you can stand up here if you want.
They already saw me. So. Thank you. Full disclosure, Randy Newberg is my publicist. No, I've never met Randy. And by the way, I'm a hunter, so it's kind of ironic that I get labeled as an anti-hunter, and our organization, Wildlife for All, is anti-hunting, which is not. It's not at all. The way we see the world of wildlife management is, there was this terrible decimation of wildlife in America, after the Civil War, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And hunters were the ones that stood up and said, no, we're gonna run out of game. This is crazy, we gotta do something. And they advocated for state laws and federal laws, and Audubon was in the mix. And, they saved wildlife in America. And the system of wildlife management at the state level that we have in New Mexico and in many states is a product of that time. It was, that era when, think of it, I don't think the word ecology existed. Our science was at such a rudimentary state at that point. And people's values have changed as well. So what Jesse's talking about is, so the way we would like to see wildlife management in every state pivot to be aligned with the public trust doctrine that all wildlife is part of a public trust. We are all beneficiaries of that trust, and it should be managed to protect the trust for us and for future generations. And it's not protect wildlife for hunters or for bird watchers, it's for all of us. And that's a change we seek. And it's funny, our goal is not to get rid of hunting. Hunting is one use of many. It's just, currently, it happens, consumptive uses like hunting and fishing and trapping happen to be prioritized, and there's structural reasons for that, funding, and part of that are these outdated statutes that we have in New Mexico. Our mission statement was drafted and adopted by our legislature in 1921, and it reflects the very utilitarian focus of the era, that wild animals were primarily resources for human use, consumption primarily. So when, and Jesse didn't mention, I don't think, that the bill that we have, that we are pushing right now, is a combination of several years of trying to get different bills passed. One bill would have addressed commission reform, and the Wildlife Federation was really leading that effort. Another was to change the mission and expand the authority of the Game Department and Game Commission, and other groups were leading that, including ours. So we have failed for many years individually, and now we combined our bills, and we are combining our efforts. Part of that is to revise the 1921 mission statement that is in New Mexico statute, and I've seen it, similar language in other states where you have a mission statement in statute. It's very utilitarian, so we have revised it, and that was a compromise. We did not want to see any uses of wildlife sort of mentioned. We just wanted to acknowledge that wildlife has intrinsic value, ecological value, is a public trust, and we are all beneficiaries. And that's pretty much what that is now in the revised mission statement, along with food supply. And that's, we can live with that. Yeah, so, and I eat meat, so, I recognize that hunting is an important tradition and current source of protein for a lot of people, including many New Mexicans. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. That was fantastic. It really drives home the importance of compromise, right? We have to work together. We've got to come up with solutions. And your reference to the public trust doctrine, Kevin, is so valuable, because hunters love to say we got to focus on the public trust, but we often, modify our interpretation to serve our own specific needs, instead of recognizing that wildlife is a beneficiary for all people, whether you hunt or you don't hunt. So we don't have a ton of time left, but we do have a little bit of time, and I want to open it up for questions from the audience. Is that okay, Angie? Can I do that? I'll give you this microphone and you can go around. I think Mitch has a question. Looks like Tim's got a question. So if you're okay with it, we'll spend a little time on some Q&A.
Great panel. Sorry. I agree with every word that I heard this morning. My state of Washington went through this previously in the 80s. We updated the name of the department and the mission statement, very much what you're describing. We also had a history of polarization going back to literal wars over salmon allocations that had the constituents balkanized. And it's been a lot of effort for a lot of years to reverse that and create the coalitions to where we're now restoring the balance to where biodiversity and non-consumptive values are getting a little bit more of the budget. But our commission and some of the constituencies are pushing a bit hard. So it comes down to a question of strategy, of idealism versus maybe real politic. And I think what we're seeing now is a level of impatience that is causing, pushing too hard from one side, that's causing backlash from the hunter side and repolarization. And we're headed into a legislative session now where deep cuts are gonna happen, and we're vulnerable because our coalition is in tatters. And I think we're gonna see the gains we've made in biodiversity appropriations over the last 3 years be reversed. So just that question about moving at a pace that keeps people together Kevin, if you want to respond to that, it'd be great. I think you probably know what I'm talking about and who.
So one of the reasons we are so fortunate in New Mexico is our state has a lot of money now. And so people are very generous now, in a very generous mood to make changes. Unfortunately, most states aren't. We have a lot of money because of oil and gas. I don't know. I mean, there's so many, I'd like to hear from the other panelists, but so many factors, it's the right time, you have the right people, or right leadership at all our constituent groups. We have a blue trifecta in this state. We both chambers of the legislature and the governor. Not that the governor's been a great friend of wildlife, but all these things are aligning to make it happen. Now, I'm not privy to the dynamics of your folks in Washington. I know there's a very active coalition with Washington Wildlife First at the helm, sort of. I don't know if the Federation is part of that, but okay, so we can talk. I don't know what's going on, but you have to be respectful and I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm sure there's some urgency to get things done while Inslee's still in office, same as in Colorado, and to some extent here too. Anybody else want to? Yes.
I can't decide whether I have something to add or not, but then I just took the microphone, so I guess I'll talk. No, I guess I was thinking about our previous 10 years, and I feel like it's not quite fair to say that we weren't working well together before at previous iterations of this bill. I mean, like, our coalition has been working together really well for 10 years on this general issue. I just think that what's changing now is that we put all three issues together in a more committed way. I feel like when we started this coalition, we were very focused on commission reform, and we weren't really taking into account the other parts of wildlife management here. And I think looking at the issue more holistically has brought our coalition together in a stronger way, and also brought our bill sponsors on board in a stronger way. And I feel like it's also lent momentum to this sort of omnibus bill that we're trying to do. And so I don't want to sell ourselves short, is I guess what I'm saying. Like, I feel like we were good friends before, and we're just like better friends now. Is that fair? But I do think that the stars are sort of aligning this year. I don't know, now I'm gonna sound way too optimistic, but it's also our governor's last long session, and she has not acted on wildlife in a really robust way, with the possible exception of a couple of laws that Jess has passed. And so it kind of feels like her last chance, and maybe we can pressure her to do that for that reason too this year. So I don't know. I'm feeling good about it. And Jess, that's more.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add, some of the things that come to mind, because I think I'm one of a handful of us that have been around and have been working. Yeah, I think I worked on bill language on an iteration of this literally a decade ago. Yeah, John's been here for a century.
98 years. I added it up.
He was on the very first game commission in New Mexico.
I wrote the bill.
You look great. I will say what has been really nice, and I realize it's hard to kind of bottle some of, I think, what has happened organically and luckily with our coalition and necessarily export it to other states. But I think what I've seen over the past several years, most recent years in particular, is that there's been a really nice, at least in my mind, organic, I don't know if there was some specific efforts, but there's been, I wouldn't call it a hierarchy in our coalition, but I think just a natural look to just a handful of individuals to represent the different interests within the coalition, because as we are working on the nuances and details and strategies, it is really hard, as I'm sure a lot of you know, to get anything done when you've got 50, 60 cooks in the kitchen, right? So having a handful of leaders in our coalition that we all can trust to kind of make some decisions, report back to us. I mean, and I'm looking specifically to especially Jesse and Judy. I think maybe a couple of others that aren't on the panel today. But they've really stewarded the coalition as a whole in a really helpful way. I think another thing that's been really great is the hiring of an outside consultant to help with shaping certain strategies and messaging, and it's served as I think a little bit more of like an objective outside guide that has like spurred movement and decisions that needed to happen, rather than having all of us come back to the table every meeting and hash over the same discussions. So if outside consultants are an option, if looking at kind of coalition structures where you can trust kind of a top tier leadership might work for your state, that is something to consider. Judy's gonna share our website.
No, I would echo that. We were able to engage an outside communications person, and that has been really, really helpful because he's been organizing all of our external communications and education. So he's like, here's an op-ed that should come from an animal protection organization, and here's an op-ed that should come from a sportsman organization, and we're gonna send this one this time, and this one that time, and we're gonna do a website together and put all your logos on it, and like, that sort of organization has been like crucial this year. So if you wanna go to our website, it's wildlife4nm.org, and it's FOR, not the number, so wildlife4nm.org, and you can see all the organizations that are currently in the coalition. Hopefully we'll add some more before the end of the session.
Thank you, Judy. Angie, do we have time? It looks like Naomi has a question. I think Tim did. Tim, did you give up on me?
I gave up.
You gave up on me. Tim gave up on me, but Naomi.
No, I gave
So, thank you. This has been a dream come true to see all of you talking about this incredible package and working together. And I've seen from my experience of working on what I call strengthening state wildlife agencies over the last 20, 30 years is really that it only succeeds when people are working together. And that story of coming from very different backgrounds and going to legislatures, when you're together, they are astonished. I've heard that from many state agencies tell me that when they have that happen in their state. But when you're divided, they know they don't have to do anything. So they will just say, they don't have to bother even listening to you because of that. So that was a very powerful example. And I just want to thank you all for doing this work and remind people that, which is a plug, we have a toolkit on the affiliate website, which is, we will add this website and add some more examples, but we have a lot of this information compiled, and I really hope many others will provide the leadership that Jesse and all of you have to make this happen in your state. It really is transformative. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I have a super
quick question actually for Jesse. And I want to know if you feel like your organization has been harmed by the perception that you've broken ranks with the sporting community.
Boy, that's gonna be hard to give a very quick answer to. When I first became executive director back in 2018, it was December, so the legislative session started the following month in January. My close friend Jessica Johnson was working on a bill that would outlaw coyote killing contests in the state of New Mexico. And the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, I was encouraged by Ben Neary, our conservation director, someone who I often look to for guidance and advice. He said we should support that bill because those contests is gratuitous killing and it threatens the future of hunting. When people see giant piles of coyotes that are violating the North American model of wildlife conservation, which has 7 tenets, one of those tenets is that wildlife shall not be taken for frivolous use. And these coyotes were not being utilized in any way. The furs aren't worth very much anymore, so they're not even taking the time to skin the hides off them and use the furs. They were just, it was inappropriate. We felt like it was a misuse of wildlife, period. And so I with the help of John Crenshaw, the board of directors voted that we were gonna support that bill. And my gosh, you would not believe the attacks against me and New Mexico Wildlife Federation. We were called a lot of things. I was called a lot of things, death threats even. We're on the news on a regular basis. We're in national media. I remember, green decoy, I heard that a whole bunch of times. Wolf in sheep's clothing, I heard that. I was an anti-hunter infiltrating the hunting community from the inside, trying to destroy it. But we got it done. We worked together, we got the bill passed, and I'm very, very proud of that. And a lot of people who attacked us for taking that position have since, in the last 5 years, especially this proposition that was in Colorado to ban cat hunting last year, have contacted me and said, man, you guys were right. It's so good that we did that, because what those contests were doing is really harming the perception of hunting by the non-hunting public, and recognize that only about 5% of the population of this country identify as hunters. So our ability to continue doing this thing we love is dependent on approval from 95% of the population. When you have giant piles of dead coyotes with blocks of wood in their mouth and duct tape around their, that's not good. It's not good for the future of hunting. It's not appropriate. And so to answer your question, Lou, I think that initial move let everybody in the state of New Mexico know. Again, we've got about 70,000 members here. The New Mexico Wildlife Federation does. Everybody knew right from the beginning the way this organization was going to operate, as long as I was affiliated with it, and we're going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I don't think now it's surprising to anybody. Sorry to be so long-winded, I know I'm going over time here, Angie, so she's probably stressing out on our agenda here already. So I apologize. But we started a little bit late too, but I'll say this. This is important. I came on board and I was a contractor. My background was destroying wildlife habitat to make houses for people, and now all of a sudden I'm going to be executive director of a conservation organization. The funding community freaked out. They're calling me like, "Whoa, what's going on over here?" It was insane. And I wanted to prove to people that I've got a history, I've got a background, whatever. But I care deeply about public lands. I care deeply about wildlife. I care deeply about conservation. I can work with anybody. So we were doing a public lands rally at the Roundhouse, and I invited an organization to co-sponsor the event with me. That organization was Wild Earth Guardians. And Lou Carpenter, my DCP, called me. He said, "Whoa, wait, hey, do you know what you're doing here?" He's like, "Holy cow, man, is this really what you want to do?" And I said, "Yeah, it is what I want to do, because it's public lands rally. It's not a hunting rally. We're talking about the value of public lands, and we've got these threats coming out of Utah now. Everybody's familiar with the case in the Supreme Court. It requires every single user and lover of public lands to unite to fight against these attacks against the thing that we love. It doesn't matter if you hunt or you don't hunt. If you love public land, you're on my team when it comes to the public lands rally." And so the New Mexico Wildlife Federation's made a lot of decisions before the formation of this entire coalition, or before our involvement in it, I think, that let people know how we operate and that everybody's welcome at our table, and we're gonna have conversations with everybody, and we're gonna engage with people, and we're gonna be respectful. And we recognize the validity of different opinions. The public trust doctrine, again, wildlife belongs to everybody. So whether or not Kevin and I agree, or Juby or Jessica and I agree, doesn't matter. Their opinion's just as valid as mine, even though it might be different. So these conversations have been invaluable, Lou. There's some extreme sports people in the state of New Mexico who probably don't appreciate the direction that the New Mexico Wildlife Federation's taken in the past 5 years. And to those people, tough, this is who we are, this is how we operate. That's what it is.
Thanks, Jesse. I just wanted to quickly just add an external point of view on the question of whether it's damaged the New Mexico Wildlife Federation, because I think you're on the inside, so you're feeling all the heat. And I'm not BSing when I tell you that your leadership approach with this organization and your ability to hold true to the organization's values, but to also work in coalition so well with others, I think has strengthened your organization. You are the strongest, most influential hunting organization in our state legislature, and it's actually legitimized your organization and your work. So I think it's only benefited.
Yeah, just a quick question. Over the 10 years, what have you guys settled on as the best frequency of meeting? Because I know a lot of coalitions happen, but how frequent you meet matters a lot. So I'm curious, what have you found as your sweet spot?
I would say it depends on the year, and it varies greatly. So we've had times in our coalition, it just depends like what bill we ran that year. When we've really been working hard on a bill together, which has happened a couple of times, we've met extremely regularly, like during the year, once or twice a month, and then leading up to the session much more often. There have been years when the bills that some of us have been working on have just been pieces of this package, and there hasn't been as cohesive a coalition, but the coalition stayed together and still met. I wanna say like every couple of months during those years when we weren't like really actively working together on a bill, we were still meeting, actually at the Wildlife Federation offices with lunch. Remember, that was a long time ago. This past year, when we've really been determined to do this omnibus package with all three pieces, it's been very frequent. So about a year ago, when we decided to do it, we were meeting once a month, I wanna say. And then about 8 months ago, leading up to bill drafting and things like that, we switched to every other week. And now we're meeting in between those times as subgroups and things like that. And so, officially the whole coalition gets together every other Friday. But we're all having sidebar conversations kind of all the time. Tomorrow, we're up here for 2 hours in the middle of the day doing a mock committee hearing together, where we're gonna run through the bill with our bill sponsors in the Capitol, in a committee room, with our coalition members pretending to be scary legislators who ask really terrible questions, which we're not anticipating actually getting that many scary questions, but there's like a lot of prep work going into actually running a bill this big, so the closer it gets to the session, the more it's ramping up. And we're already placing like op-eds and LTs and things like that too, so.
And I'll add that we meet by Zoom now, even though we don't need to, and that's really helped because, it's a big state.
Great, thank you. Raising hunting and fishing license fees is no easy lift, so congratulations there. Despite a lot of best efforts, those hunting and angling is dropping in usage, right? And even if we increase license dollars, eventually we may see a dip in revenue. Are you including any other kind of user groups or funding mechanisms within this that will kind of help to kind of close that funding gap?
Do you want to answer that too? I don't wanna, does anyone else want to do that?
Judy, you're up.
Okay, sorry, now I feel like I'm monopolizing. Yeah, that's true, it's good practice. So in this bill, the only revenue is the license fee increase. So that's the only thing that's actually like in writing in this legislation. But we're very committed to getting additional sources of revenue that are not hunting and fishing dollar generated. And so there's a few different ways that we're all pursuing that, and we're working on those together. One was the Land of Enchantment Legacy Fund that I mentioned before. So 22% of the revenue from that fund actually does go to game and fish for a species of greatest conservation need. So most of us work together to get that passed. So that's generating $3 million, 2.75, I was close. $2.75 million a year for non-game species through that. Again, we hope to add additional money to that and down in the future so that that becomes more. Another mechanism we're pursuing this year is that the legislature is doing a sort of trial fund called the Grow Fund. It's like, that's not the right way to describe it, but they're creating like a big fund to fund new programs and new ideas and new personnel at agencies on a trial basis for 3 years. And if that new program and new people and whatever they're funding through that Grow Fund works out over a 3-year period, it can become part of the recurring budget. And so Chairman Small, who's one of the sponsors of our bill, is including $10 million in the Grow Fund to game and fish for non-game work. So that would be $3 million a year over the next 3 years. And if they do well with that, doing non-game species work, then it will become part of the recurring general fund appropriation every year, HB2. So we're doing that, and then we're also, I think still, is Dan Roper still pursuing his one-time appropriation push? So we're also, I hope, also pursuing an additional one-time $10 million appropriation for the department this year. So we're trying a bunch of different ways to get additional revenue to the department. I think we all recognize that hunters and fishers should not be the sole providers of revenue for the department. It's just the way it's set up right now, so we're all looking at different ways to make that better.
Thank you, Judy, and I know, and you said that was the last question, but I think Curzel might have a question, so let's, Brian, you wanna, here, let me give you this microphone.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I just wanted to tie this into a topic that we had yesterday about state wildlife action plans and see if, because obviously the New Mexico State Wildlife Action Plan is being revised and is due in October 2025. If and when this bill passes, I just wanted to see if the panelists had any thoughts about how this bill is related to the State Wildlife Action Plan and may actually be able to breathe some life into that in ways that maybe it hasn't had before.
Great question. So currently, the Game Commission and the department do not have authority to manage many species of wildlife in New Mexico. So the species that they have authority over are delineated in statute. The legislature actually took the time to specify which species, or which taxa the department had authority to manage. And it leaves out about, it only includes about 60% of New Mexico's vertebrates and virtually none of its invertebrates. And our species of greatest conservation need, the current revision would list 399. Many of those, the department does not have authority to manage. So yeah, there's this, and the bill would give them that authority. It would give the commission and the department the authority to manage any species that it deemed necessary, that they deem necessary.